right, welcome everybody. This is Deepfakes, Deep Trouble, analyzing the potential impacts of deepfakes on market manipulation. My name is Skelton, and I am pleased as punch that y'all have joined me on this Wednesday afternoon. So to start with a little bit about me, I studied global security and intelligence studies at a really tiny nerd school in the middle of the desert. I worked for GoDaddy for a little while, and while I was working for them, they actually sent me to my first DEF CON 25, which I went to as a total and complete InfoSec newbie. That was where I met my close friend and mentor, Mike, who gently guided me towards the path of information security. I was picked up by a large financial institution, first in an InfoSec generalist role. Then I moved on to doing strategic cyber threat intelligence, which is what I do now and absolutely adore. In my free time, I like to romp around in my F-150 pickup truck Harvey or snuggle up with my Siamese kitty cat Eleanor. So before we get started, I wanted to kind of do an intro on how I'm going to be delivering this talk. When I explain new concepts, I'm going to do so first in a technical way and then in a more layperson's way. I believe that the barrier of entry to technical concepts should be lower. And I also believe that even if you're an expert on something, hearing it explained in a different way can help shift and mature your perspective. So we'll start by just going over deepfakes. What are they? How do they work? We'll move on to an intro into markets and market manipulation. We'll talk about past examples of cyber influence on the stock market. We'll talk about my own personal adventures and misadventures in deepfake creation. We'll talk about future possibilities, and then we'll wrap it up by exploring some solutions. So what even are deepfakes? Well, in the traditional model, generative adversarial networks, or GANs, use two machine learning models, the generator and the discriminator, and they basically just duke it out. So the generator will create videos using data, and then the discriminator will try to call out the discrepancies in those videos. It just keeps going until the discriminator can't tell a difference anymore. You can think of it kind of like the Tom and Jerry of deepfakes, right? So I'll show you a video right now. That's an example of the traditional deepfake model.
Fine.
Get a lot written today?
Yes.
Hey, the weather forecast said it's going to snow tonight.
What do you want me to do about it?
Come on, hon. Don't be so grouchy.
I'm not being grouchy. I just want to finish my work.
Okay, I understand. I'll come back later on with a couple of sandwiches for you, and maybe you'll let me read something then.
Wendy, let me explain something to you. Whenever you come in here and interrupt me, you're breaking my concentration. You're distracting me. And it will then take me time to get back to where I was. Understand?
So I've never seen The Shining, and honestly, I probably never will. But if you had told me that Jim Carrey was in The Shining just after seeing that, I would have been like, yeah, I dig it, sure. It kind of shows you like the quality, and even when people are moving and faces are moving, it retains the structure of the deep fake. But there's another model that's being developed coming out of a research team between Cornell and Russia, unlikely pairing, I know. But they are looking at a new sort of format for deepfakes, right? So it performs lengthy meta-learning on a large data set and then uses high-quality generators and discriminators to create and frame one or few shot models. So in layman's terms, it basically just watches a ton of videos of just people talking, all sorts of different facial angles, and then applies the learning from those people talking to the target images. So that looks a little bit more simple, and the most famous one was done actually on Mona Lisa.
If you manage a team,
watch an ad
have
first.
to try Monday.com. Monday.com is a platform to track everything.
Any managers in the room, it's probably good advice. So you can see, obviously, the Mona Lisa never said any of those things or never did that moving face thing. But that kind of gives you an example of how the deepfake threat continues to evolve over time. So I believe just like the malware threat continues to evolve, we'll keep seeing different types of deepfakes as we continue to evolve the technology. And Washington's starting to take notice of the deepfake threat, right? So Marco Rubio actually recently stated that he considered the threat of deepfake videos as serious and significant as the threat of nuclear war. So yeah, it's pretty serious stuff. As far as the legality of deepfakes goes, it's kind of across the board, right? So in Virginia, they recently passed laws outlawing deepfakes as part of their revenge porn legislature. In Texas, on September 1st, a law will go into effect outlawing deepfakes as part of election security. But obviously, this is a very piecemeal approach, and it's never going to keep up with the aggressive threat of deepfakes. On the federal side, there's 2 pieces of legislature in the House of Representatives right now, but neither of them have gained very much traction. And even if they did, we know how long and arduous the federal legislation process can be, especially with a divided Congress. So let's take a minute now to talk about the market. I'm going to start by introducing it, right? So the market has 3 components. There's the currency markets, the equity markets like the stock market, and then bonds, which are backed by the Treasury. Ultimately, it'd be really hard to impact the currency market using deepfakes, so we're just going to go ahead and take that out of the equation. They use such a complicated entanglements of the relationships with 2 countries that it would take too much effort, essentially, to really create an impact. Now, within the equity market, you have 3 different components. You have the Dow Jones, which is very banking heavy, the NASDAQ, which is tech heavy, and the S&P 500, which is essentially sort of just a mix of everything. It is worth noting here that there is a trading curb rule in the equity markets. It's a fail-safe, so just in case there's some extremely suspicious, shady stuff going on, it'll automatically come into place and halt trading. That's important, and we'll come back to that later. So market manipulation is really narrowly defined as artificially impacting the supply or demand of a security. So this is basically just using misinformation about an individual, maybe a company, to impact the stock or performance of a trade or shares. So we'll be talking about market manipulation a little bit more widely today, both on the micro level of how you can slide underneath the fail-safe benchmark and still exert market impact, as well as in a macro way, which is basically bypassing the fail-safe by causing enough damage that even if the fail-safe was triggered, it would be too late. Also, I like to appreciate this very unsettling photo that comes up on Google Images if you Google image market manipulation. So let's take a minute to talk about past examples of cyber threats that impacted the stock market. So you might remember in 2011 when the Associated Press's Twitter account was hijacked, and they posted a tweet saying that there had been an explosion at the White House and the president was injured. Automatically, the Dow Jones plummeted, and the S&P 500 lost $136.5 billion in market capitalization, which is calculated by the number of shares divided by the price of those shares. Or in this case, you can see that the markets quickly recovered, but a lot of the damage was caused by computer algorithms that automatically pull from social media and news sites and make trades based on predetermined rules. Earlier this year in April, there was a huge run on the UK's Metro Bank when a WhatsApp rumor went viral. It said that Metro Bank was liquid, right? And people were running to Metro Bank and pulling out all their assets, all because of a rumor. It was completely false. And this one got physical. There were several reported robberies of people who would come to the bank to pull out everything they had. Additionally, in the deepfake vector already, there have been reports of people using deepfaked audio of CEOs from big corporations to call on the phone lower-level employees and ask them to transfer large sums of money around. Already, there's been $3 million stolen just from this method alone, and that report was at the end of June. So we can imagine that between what hasn't been reported and what has happened since then, that number is probably much higher. So we can talk a little bit now about my own personal adventures and misadventures in deepfake creation. So when I started this talk, I assumed that the barrier to entry for deepfakes was like here, like literally like anyone could just like walk up and like, I have a computer, I'm a dude, I'm gonna make a deepfake. Now that I've gone through the process, I would put it more probably like here. So if you have the time, and especially if you have an inkling of like a technical background and you have the right technology, I still think that it's really relatively easy to do. Essentially, there's 2 main schools of thought. There's Deepface Lab, which is an active GitHub repository, and then there's Fakeapp, which was taken offline in early 2019, but is still available by Googling it. Interestingly, both of these run on a Windows dependency. So Not only that, but you also have you must have an NVIDIA graphics card to really create a high quality deepfake. So that actually was surprising to me. It's worth noting here that you can't run deepfakes through a VM because VMs can't use the hardware of the computer they're running on, especially in this case, the graphics card. So you need to have a system that's running Windows OS and has an NVIDIA graphics card, or you need to use an external NVIDIA graphics card. I also ran into some fun legal issues when I was creating my deepfake. So I got yelled at by a corporate lawyer and told that I could only do a deepfake of myself. That would be really boring. Also, I could just make a video of me being like, Parmesan cheese tastes bad, and then I could stand here and be like, that wasn't me, I would never say anything like that. So I cajoled with the lawyer a little bit longer, and he eventually acquiesced and said that I could make a a deepfake video if I used somebody who worked at the same financial institution I work at and who would provide written consent to let me do this to their face. And I finally found someone. So you might recognize this guy here. David Mortman runs the CFP here at BSides Las Vegas. He's very involved in all the B-sidesing. He's kind of an OG. I'm a big fan. And he graciously allowed me to use him in my deepfake experiment. So Mortman's no Kim Kardashian, right? But it took a very simple Google search to pull up 2 relatively high quality videos to use as my extraction content. What we're looking for here is from the head up with nothing in front of the face. So in actuality, this microphone would make that video tough to use. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the 2 different types. There is Deepface Lab, which offers 3 different packages that are available on Google Drive, and they're dependent on your CPU specs and your graphics card. It's actively updated. Most recent that I saw was July 23rd of this year, so it's still being actively updated and worked on. It is, however, less user-friendly, especially when compared to Fakeapp. You're manually running the commands on your computer, and it takes a little bit more technical knowledge to be able to go through this process. It also has you work mainly off of a tutorial, and when you go to use those techniques on your own video, it gets a little bit more dicey. There are YouTube guides, but the main one doesn't have any audio, and I feel like if you were coming to this as somebody who had never trained on technical YouTube videos, like me, it's a little bit harder to follow. It's also apparently just run by one guy out of Russia, and he Google translated his entire README, which was hilarious. My favorite part is actually right here. I know it's hard to read. It says, Deepface Lab, created on pure enthusiasm, 1 person. Yeah, this guy is awesome. This README was the most fun part of this project by far. Whoops. Can I back-click? Nope. Okay, so the other option is using Fakeapp. So Fakeapp was taken down in February of this year. The last published version is version 2.2. The biggest issue that I ran into with Fakeapp is mostly around the second point there. It's really dependent on the programs that were current at time of publishing. So it does have some significant dependencies. For example, CUDA. It requires you use CUDA version 9.7.1 with a specific patching sequence after that. And if you do not have that exact one, it will not work. So the issues that I ran into with Fakeapp, I mostly think are probably contributed to by that. It uses 2015 Windows Visual Studio, which you can only get if you have a Windows license, etc. So overall, though, Fakeapp is a lot easier to use. So you can see on this, I don't want to get in front of the projector, but you can see on this video on the side, you essentially just direct it towards the content you want to pull from, click extract. You go to the content you want to train from, click train, and then you create it. So it takes a while, but it does all the work for you if you set it up correctly. The YouTube videos, awesome. There's just one guy, and he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's like, here, let me just slowly talk you through this stuff. And some of his videos have over 400,000 views, right? So people are watching this guy. Like I said, the application interface is really easy to use, but there's also an issue with I like to refer to as the dreaded forum. So at some point on fakeapp.org, which is where this was originally lived, there was a forum, I guess, where you could ask all your questions, right? And somebody would come in and offer you a beer or some water and be like, hey, yeah, I'll help you. I'll answer your questions. And now it's not there anymore. And not only that, but it wasn't captured on the Wayback Machine, which didn't really surprise me. But the issue is that every time that this interface has an issue, a very, very polite notice comes up that says, feel free to post it on fakeapp.org/forum for help. Obviously, the forum's not up anymore. These are the two errors I ran into about 50 times each. And what's interesting is Reddit posts for these two errors still exist. But it's basically like one guy going like, hey man, I have this error. And then another guy comes in and is like, hey man, me too. And you're just like, guys. And then I'm like, they must have figured it out somehow. And then I realized when that was posted, the forum was still active. So that's Fakeapp. And ultimately, programs like Fakeapp worry me a lot more than Deepface Labs. So ultimately, this is the program that could be used by somebody with less technical experience to really go through and create their own deepfakes. So let's imagine that you were able to create a really high quality deepfake and talk about the possibilities from there. This is my shift pause, so we're shifting now. So if you wanted to impact the equity markets, you would need to start with one specific part, right? So we're going to start with the Dow Jones. So I mentioned it was heavy with banks. Perhaps you make a deepfake of a CEO of a large consumer bank, right? And you release it and say, whoops. You release it and say, and in the video he's saying that the firm is no longer liquid. So even if it didn't take effect in the stock market, liquidity issues are a huge problem, which is what we saw with the Metro Bank issue. So right away, people are running into the streets. We're going to see a huge enterprise impact to that bank alone. So that's just if it doesn't take hold in the stock market. But let's say that it does. And let's say that right after that, you release another deepfake video, maybe even of the same CEO, blaming a specific tech company for the damage that was caused by the first video. So now all of a sudden, you're affecting not only the Dow Jones, but the NASDAQ as well. And you can see how quickly that could spiral out of control. If you wanted to go below the threshold, what you could do is you could pass around a deepfake, a really negative deepfake sentiment on Twitter, perhaps even just using bot accounts. When the APIs from that specific stock connected to the Twitter to pull down the information to change the price of that stock, you could really impact the price of that stock and still slide right under the benchmark, maybe not even raising too many flags at once. So that's how you would do it if you wanted to stay below. If you wanted to impact the bonds market, you would need to call into question the ability of the United States to pay off its debts, right? Because the bonds are backed by the Treasury. So in this case, maybe you release a deepfake of the chairman of the Fed. Really, especially with the upcoming budget renegotiations that are already raising red flags, you can see how a really sophisticated deepfake could have a significant impact on the bonds market. And ultimately, all this adds up to is a giant domino effect. If all of this happened at one time, you can see how everyone would be chasing in different directions, trying to pin this down, and it could cause a significant amount of damage very quickly. So hopefully you're all significantly scared out of your socks. We can talk about some different solutions that are on the table. So right now, the solutions are all longer latency, right? And what we're looking for is something that can get ahead of technology that exists to avoid detection, right? Exists to avoid those discrepancies being called out. So these longer latency solutions may not be practical. For instance, the University of Rochester is looking at creating integrity scores to use on their on videos released to the internet. So the video, you'd have a browser extension, the video is color coordinated, and you're able to say like, ooh, that's a green video, that one's been messed with, or that one's maybe misinformation. There's a startup called Amber Authenticate, which is using authenticity based on cryptographic hashes. There's a very vague startup called New Knowledge, and they're saying that for the low price of $500,000, they will keep false information about your company from taking hold on social media. Not sure how they do that. Honestly, don't think they're sure either. And of course, we couldn't stop talking about deepfakes without mentioning blockchain. Factcom is one company that is, with mixed success, looking at using blockchain to detect deepfakes. Right now, the only shorter latency solution we have is to keep monitoring both above and below ground forums for the development and release of another accessible deepfake software like Fakeapp. That, in my eyes, is what we have the potential to see cause the most damage and make the technology the most accessible. But in order to really take care of this threat, we're going to need community collaboration, human review. This is a Nathaniel Gleicher quote, I did not say this. Community collaboration, human review, and a whole slew of other factors to really tie it all together. But ultimately, this community doesn't really have a choice. So I'm looking forward to it. So I was too blessed to be stressed during this whole process. I was stressed anyway. John Seymour is my Proving Grounds mentor, and he was totally awesome through the whole thing. These are a few other people that helped me. That is the guy who sat next to me and patiently tried to troubleshoot with me all day for several days. So I'll go ahead and wrap it up. For any questions, comments, qualms, or general existential tidbits, that's my Twitter handle. And thank you guys for being here.
Any questions?
Do you think there's any coincidence between the fact that the app was called Fakeapp and Faceapp?
So I think we know where a lot of the deepfakes technology is coming from and going, especially with our Russian buddy from Deepface Lab. I don't think they're directly tied together, but we do know that that is obviously being sent straight into a server in Russia for facial recognition. So I don't think there's a direct correlation, but maybe a little bit.
I was just thinking when you were talking about market manipulation, let's say that like a CEO of that has a very powerful stance releases a statement that they're going to, like on video, that they're going to release, or they're going to sell the stock for $420 per share to all the stockholders, but then later comes out and says, no, that was the result of a perfect deepfake. What would be, strategies to, counteract, like reverse market manipulation? Do you think that would even be possible in the near future?
That's a really good question, and especially for that specific use case. So I don't know a lot about how you would backtrack from that. Financial institutions, to their credit, are starting to at least acknowledge that deepfakes are a threat. But it's like with every other part of our democracy and whatever else that's under threat from deepfakes, this is a community issue. So, but I think it's important that they are starting to look at it. From that specific angle, I haven't seen any movement, but I'll bring it up.
Any questions?
Hello. So I've been thinking a lot about deepfakes recently, and more on the social science side. And in a perfect scenario, right? So assuming we have a perfect 100% deepfake where it's like just there's no lagging frames, nothing, like it just looks 100% on point. And then on the other hand, we also have a 100% accurate deepfake detection algorithm, right? Saying that this is a falsified video or audio. I often think what comes after that, if we have videos that are deepfaked and we have a perfect detection algorithm, does that matter in the end? Because we have things, right? This is the kind of question is, this is a fake video. Like it tells you somewhere on the screen, it's like, yep, this is fake. But does it really matter? Because that seed is implanted in your head. Like you've checked, like kind of like individuals with OCD, like they've checked their doors with their locks. They have checked that they have turned off the gas stove. But then you drive 10 minutes, you're like, did I turn off the gas stove? Shit. And then you have to drive back. And so I wonder what your opinions are on that in that realm is, do you think it will ultimately matter to the people who these defects are being targeted towards?
So I think it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, that's really kind of the misinformation side. We've seen already that false information spreads faster and wider than real information. So even when social media companies are now looking at it and, Facebook will gently direct you otherwise, lightly, do you really want to watch this? Like you said, I think to some extent you can't impact the way that people intake the information, we can just do our part to make sure that that information is as limited as possible.
Okay, give it up for the speaker. Thank you very much.